Childbirth in ancient Rome was a silent battlefield. We have all seen the simplified versions in films, but the real story is far more gripping. This is the true, complex, and surprising world of the Roman midwife. By the end, you will understand how these women wielded medical skill, spiritual authority, and legal power in a single day's work. What secrets did they carry about life and death in a world without modern medicine, and why were they both revered and deeply feared? What does it truly mean to hold life in your hands? To enter her world is to step into a house gripped by silent tension. The air in a wealthy Roman domus, a household, would be thick with incense and whispered prayers, not celebration. For the paterfamilias, the absolute head of the family, this day was about far more than a new child. It was about lineage, legacy, and the very continuity of his name and property. A successful birth meant a new citizen, a potential soldier for the empire, an heir to carry on the family's sacred rights. A failure could mean the end of a bloodline, a political alliance shattered, and a mother lost. The statistics from the ancient world are stark, though precise numbers are lost to time. Historians estimate that for every 1,000 births, dozens of mothers would not survive, and infant mortality could claim 1 in 3 children before their first year. This was the brutal reality. Every contraction was not just a sign of labor, but a roll of the dice with fate itself. In this environment, the midwife was not merely a medical attendant. She was the general called to the front lines of this domestic war. Her skills would determine whether this day ended in joyous announcement or in muffled grief. The family's hopes, their social standing, their very future, rested quite literally in her hands. This immense pressure forged her role into something unique, a blend of healer, priestess, and trusted confidante, operating in the most intimate and perilous space Roman society knew. Her hands were her credentials. The Roman midwife, or obstetrix, was far more than a kindly neighbor who happened to be present. She was a professional operating in a complex social web. Her identity was not a single story. She could be a freed woman, a former slave who had earned her liberty and now practiced her trade for a fee, building a reputation and clientele. She might be a slave herself, a valuable asset owned by a wealthy family, her skills reserved exclusively for that household's women, or she could be an independent practitioner, moving between the homes of the well-to-do, her services negotiated and paid for. This variety tells us something crucial. Midwifery was recognized as a distinct and valuable craft, one that could define a woman's place and economic standing in the world. But how did one become such a practitioner? There were no medical schools, no formal degrees. Training was almost entirely hands-on, a sacred chain of knowledge passed from an experienced midwife to her apprentice. A young woman, perhaps a daughter or a slave assigned to the role, would learn by watching, by assisting, by being entrusted with simpler tasks under a watchful eye. She would memorize herbal preparations, practice the positioning of a mother, learn to recognize the dangerous signs that meant a birth was going wrong. This was knowledge earned in the most direct way possible, through lived experience at the bedside, yet some evidence points to a surprising layer of formalized learning. Our clearest window comes not from a midwife herself, but from a physician, Soranus of Ephesus, a Greek doctor who practiced in Rome during the early 2nd century, wrote an exhaustive work on gynecology. While he was a male theoretician, his writings were clearly intended to instruct midwives on best practices. His text outlines in meticulous detail what a competent midwife should know. She must be literate to follow written instructions. She should have a sound mind and steady hands. Her knowledge should span anatomy, the use of birthing chairs and stools, techniques for turning a baby in the womb, the preparation of medicinal herbs and poultices, and even the care of the newborn. Soranus provides a curriculum. The very existence of such a detailed manual suggests that for some, particularly those serving elite families, midwifery was approaching the status of a learned profession. It was a blend of traditional, hands-on wisdom and the emerging medical theory of the age. So when that midwife entered the tense household, she brought with her not just comforting folklore, but a repository of practice, skill, and possibly even study technique. Her authority in that room was built on a foundation that was both ancient and surprisingly sophisticated. Her professional status was defined by the tools she wielded. A Roman midwife arrived not with empty hands, but with a kit that was a physical manifestation of her dual role, a collection of items bridging the gap between the physical and the spiritual. Her bag held a world of ancient gynecology, a mix of startling innovation and deeply rooted tradition. Perhaps the most iconic artifact is the Roman speculum, a bronze instrument discovered in the ruins of Pompeii. Far from a crude tool, it is a complex device of screws and blades designed to dilate and allow internal examination. Its existence is a quiet revolution. It tells us that these practitioners were not just passive observers, they were actively investigating, seeking to see and understand what was happening inside the body. This was a form of direct intervention that required both knowledge and courage. Alongside such instruments were the more common aids for delivery itself. While wealthy homes might have a permanent birthing chair, a sturdy seat with a keyhole opening, many midwives relied on portable birthing stools. These allow the mother to sit or squat using gravity to aid the process, a principle that remains respected in many birthing practices today. The midwife's pharmacopoeia was her herbal arsenal. For pain, she might turn to the juice of the opium poppy or preparations from henbane, plants known for their sedative and analgesic properties. These were ancient anesthetics, blurring the edges of suffering. Oils, often scented with lavender or rosemary, were used for massage to soothe the mother and perhaps ease the baby's passage. Yet in that same bag, nestled beside the bronze speculum and the vials of oil, would be objects of a different nature, amulets and charms, perhaps a piece of jasper to prevent hemorrhage, or a carved figurine of the goddess Juno Lucina, protector of childbirth. These were not mere superstition, they were psychological and spiritual tools. In a world where so much was unknown and uncontrollable, invoking divine protection was a critical part of care. It offered hope, it calmed fear, it created a ritual of safety around an inherently dangerous event. So which of these methods held real merit? The principle of the birthing stool is sound biomechanics. The herbal pain relievers, while dangerously potent if misused, contained active compounds that genuinely affected the body. The use of oils for massage and comfort is timeless. Even the speculum in its basic function represents a logical desire to see and assist. The dangers lay in the lack of sterile technique, the inability to treat severe hemorrhage or infection, and the thin line between a medicinal dose of opium and a fatal one. Her toolkit was a mirror of Roman medicine itself, a bold, empirical, and often brutal attempt to assert control over the chaotic forces of life and death. Every item, from the cold bronze to the warm oil to the sacred stone, was a different kind of answer to the same desperate question. The moment she confirmed a pregnancy, her long vigil truly began. This was not a 9-month wait in the modern sense, but an active period of management where the midwife's role shifted from diagnostician to guardian. Her first task was often to verify the pregnancy itself, using a blend of observation and ancient wisdom. She would note the absence of the mother's monthly courses, observe changes in the complexion and the shape of the body, and sometimes employ more unusual tests described in medical texts, like placing a cloth soaked in the woman's urine over barley seeds to see if they sprouted. While some methods sound like folklore to us, the careful observation of physical signs was a cornerstone of her practice. Once pregnancy was confirmed, her guidance became a daily influence. The Roman ideal was to produce a strong, healthy citizen, and the midwife was the architect of that process. She prescribed a specific regimen, a combination of diet, exercise, and mental state. Soranus, our physician guide, offers a detailed plan. He advised a balanced diet of easily digestible foods, warning against rich, spicy, or overly salty dishes. Gentle exercise like walking was encouraged to maintain strength, while sudden movements, loud noises, and upsetting stories were to be avoided to keep the mother's spirits calm and stable. This was a holistic approach, recognizing that the mother's physical and emotional well-being were directly tied to the health of the child she carried. Yet woven through all this practical advice was an unshakable thread of the divine. The physical world was only one layer of reality, a belief held with absolute conviction. To protect the mother and the fragile life within her from invisible threats, the midwife would invoke a pantheon of protective powers. Juno Lucina, the light bringer, was the primary goddess of childbirth, called upon to safely guide the baby into the light of the world. Diana the huntress was also revered as a protector of women and a guardian of the threshold between wild and domestic life. The midwife might recommend amulets, offer prayers at the family shrine, or perform small, ritualized actions to ward off the evil eye or malevolent spirits. This was not a separate job from her medical duties, it was all part of the same responsibility. In a time before sonograms or blood tests, when so much about pregnancy was a mystery unfolding in darkness, these rituals provided a framework of control and comfort. They answered the terrifying question of the unknown with the assurance of divine companionship. So the midwife during those long months became a unique hybrid, a life coach and a priestess. She monitored the mother's meals and her moods, prescribed walks and whispered prayers. Every piece of advice, whether about eating lentils or wearing a carved amulet, was aimed at the same goal, navigating the profound vulnerability of creation and steering it, with both skill and faith, toward a safe harbor. But when the first true contraction signaled the start of labor, all preparation gave way to action. The midwife's authority became absolute. She transformed the chosen room into a sacred, women-only theater of birth. The paterfamilias, the master of the house, would wait anxiously in another part of the home, his power ending at the threshold. Inside, the midwife directed a series of deliberate rituals designed to bend the spiritual world to their aid. Lamps were lit, but the room was kept deliberately dim, a calm contrast to the chaos within. More strikingly, every lock in the house was opened, drawers, chests, and most importantly, the doors and windows of the birthing room itself. This was not about ventilation, it was a powerful act of sympathetic magic. If all physical pathways were unlocked, then the baby's passage into the world would also be open and unobstructed. It was a tangible expression of hope against the terrifying possibility of a stalled labor. The mother would be helped onto the birthing chair or stool, a simple but vital piece of equipment. It positioned her upright, allowing gravity to assist, and gave the midwife clear access. Here, the midwife's empirical skills took over. She would use her hands to monitor the progress, feeling for the baby's position. She coached the mother's breathing, a technique as old as time, and used oils for massage to soothe tightening muscles. For pain, she might offer a sip of wine infused with those potent herbs, like poppy or mandrake, to take the sharpest edge off the suffering. Her voice was a constant instrument, alternating between firm commands and steady encouragement. She might recite prayers to Juno Lucina, calling for her light, or invoke Diana's protection, weaving the spiritual directly into the physical struggle. The moment of crowning, when the baby's head first appeared, was the crisis point. The midwife's hands were now the sole guide. With careful pressure and support, she would help ease the shoulders out, one after the other, a maneuver requiring precise intuition. If the baby was not breathing, she would clear its mouth and nose, perhaps rubbing it with salt to stimulate a cry, or even administering a gentle, cautious slap. That first cry was more than a sign of life, it was a release of collective dread, a sound that meant the battle was nearly won, but her work was not done. With a practiced blade, she would cut the umbilical cord, leaving a length to be tied off. Then came the final, dangerous act of waiting for the afterbirth. Any retention could lead to fatal hemorrhage, so she watched with hawk-like intensity, ready to intervene with manual removal if necessary, a procedure of last resort fraught with risk. In this room for these hours, the midwife was surgeon, priestess, and commander. There were no emergency surgeries, no blood transfusions, no antibiotics. There was only her knowledge, her steady nerve, and the silent prayers hanging in the darkened air. Every successful birth was a victory snatched from the jaws of an ever-present statistical fate. The first cry was a victory, but the midwife's most harrowing duty was just beginning. In the moments after delivery, her hands moved with swift, ritualized precision. She would clear the infant's mouth and nose, then turn to the umbilical cord. This was not a simple cut. The knife she used was often made of iron, a metal believed to possess the power to ward off evil spirits. The separation of mother and child was a vulnerable threshold, and the iron blade was a spiritual safeguard as much as a practical tool. With the cord tied and cut, she laid the newborn on the ground, a symbolic return to the earth from which all life came. Only then would she lift the child and present it, but this presentation was not a celebration, it was an examination. The midwife now became the state's first inspector. Her experienced eyes scanned the tiny form for any sign of weakness or deformity. Was the baby breathing well and with strength? Were its limbs straight and fully formed? Did it have the vigorous cry of a potential citizen? In that quiet, exhausted room, she was making a cold, clinical assessment of viability. This assessment could lead to the practice that cast the darkest shadow over Roman family life: exposition or exposure. If the newborn was deemed too weak, sickly, or visibly deformed, the father, the paterfamilias, held the legal right to reject it. The midwife, bound by his authority and the social order she served, might then be given the unbearable instruction. She would be the one to take the infant, not to a cradle but to a public place, often the town dump or a crossroads, and abandon it there. This was not a secret act of murder, but a sanctioned, if grim, social policy. The reasons were brutally practical. In a world with limited resources and high infant mortality, a child who could not grow strong enough to work, fight, or bear children was seen as a drain on the family. There were also religious and superstitious fears that a deformed birth was an ill omen, a sign of divine displeasure that could bring misfortune to the entire household. Here, the midwife's complex role reaches its most tragic contradiction. She was the guardian of life, the first hands to welcome a child into the world. Yet by law and custom, she could also be the agent who carried that same child out of it. Her professional duty collided with a profound moral chasm. We can only wonder at the personal toll this took. Did some midwives quietly arrange for such infants to be found and taken in by others, perhaps by the growing early Christian communities who preached charity? Possibly, but the historical record is clear that exposure was a common reality. This heartbreaking duty underscores a chilling truth. The midwife was not just a medical practitioner. She was an executor of the family's social and eugenic policies, a gatekeeper for Roman society itself. Her judgment in those first minutes helped decide who entered the community and who was left at its literal gates. It is a stark reminder that in the ancient world, the power over life was always intertwined with the power of death, and the woman who brought you into the light could also be the one who turned away. But if the child was accepted, the midwife's vigilant care did not end with the birth. Her role now shifted from crisis manager to guardian of the fragile threshold between life and death. She remained in the household, often for the entire first week, a constant presence monitoring both mother and newborn. This period was understood to be perilously uncertain, and her expertise was the family's primary defense. Her first act for the baby was a ritual of cleansing and fortification. She would carefully wash the newborn, not with plain water, but with small amounts of salt rubbed on the skin or a weak solution of wine. This was not merely about hygiene. Salt was believed to toughen the skin and ward off evil spirits, while wine, a gift of Bacchus, was thought to impart vitality and strength. It was a medicinal and spiritual baptism rolled into one. Then came the swaddling. With long strips of linen, she would wrap the infant tightly, binding the arms and legs straight. To modern eyes, this seems restrictive, but the Romans believed it was essential for proper growth. They thought it ensured the limbs would grow straight and strong, and it was also seen as a way to soothe the child, simulating the security of the womb. For the midwife, a tightly and properly wrapped baby was also easier to handle and monitor. Her watchful eye was constantly assessing, was the baby feeding properly? Was the mother's milk coming in, or did they need to secure a wet nurse, another specialized role in the Roman world? Was the infant's color good? Was it sleeping without distress? Every sneeze, every cry, every quiet moment was filtered through her experience. She was watching for the subtle signs of fading, for the invisible infections that could claim a life in a matter of days. This was a battle against statistics in its most intimate form. The culmination of this fragile first week was a day of profound importance, the dies lustricus, the day of purification. This ceremony, held on the 8th day of life for a girl or the 9th for a boy, was the moment the child was formally introduced to the world and given its name. The midwife was central to this rite. After days of operating in the private, women's space of the birthing room, she now stepped into a more public, familial role. She would prepare the infant, often dressing it in a special white gown, and then she presented it. The presentation had two audiences, first to the household gods, the lares. These were the small statues at the family shrine, the protective spirits of the home and ancestors. The midwife, or sometimes the father, would lift the child before them, a symbolic offering and a request for their future protection. This act connected the newborn to the family's past and its spiritual guardians. Then the child was presented to the living family and invited friends. Here the father would officially announce the child's name, often choosing one that honored an ancestor, cementing the baby's place in the family lineage. The midwife's presence at this ceremony was a public acknowledgement of her crucial service. She had not only delivered a child, she had successfully guided it through the most dangerous days of its life and now presented it, purified and named, to both gods and community. In a very real sense, she was the one who had midwifed the baby not just out of the mother, but into Roman society itself. Her job for this family was finally complete. But this integration came with a new layer of responsibility, for the child was now under the watchful eyes of powers far greater than any midwife. Yet for all her skill and ritual, nature held cards that no prayer or potion could trump. The true test of a midwife's mettle came not during a routine birth, but in the screaming silence of a labor that had stalled. An obstructed labor where the baby could not pass through the birth canal was a death sentence in slow motion, a scenario every practitioner dreaded. In a world without surgical options like the cesarean section, which was almost exclusively a post-mortem procedure to save a child if the mother had already died, the midwife faced a horrifying triage with only her hands, a few crude tools, and a desperate grasp of anatomy. Her first response was often manual manipulation. She would attempt to turn the baby in the womb, a procedure known as podalic version. Slick with oil, she would reach inside, her fingers searching for a tiny foot or leg, hoping to gently pull the infant into a better position for delivery. It was an act of incredible intuition and courage, performed blind, with the clock ticking against 2 lives. The risks were immense: a ruptured uterus, catastrophic bleeding, or fatal infection. If the baby had already died in the womb, the midwife's options grew even grimmer. Her duties shifted to saving the mother at all costs, which meant removing the fetus, piece by piece if necessary. For this, she might turn to the most chilling tool in her arsenal, the hammer, a small, hooked bronze instrument. It was not a tool of delivery, but of dissection. With it, she would attempt to dismember the fetus inside the mother to allow its removal. The descriptions in ancient medical texts are clinical and brutal, a stark reminder of the stark choices in that room. There was no anesthesia for this beyond the same herbal drafts, and the physical and psychological trauma for the mother and for the midwife herself is almost beyond comprehension. For hemorrhage, the terror after birth, her resources were frighteningly scant. She would apply direct pressure with linen packs, administer strong astringent herbs like yarrow to try to contract the blood vessels, and offer vinegar to drink in the belief it could constrict flow. If the bleeding would not stop, there was little else she could do but watch as life drained away, her hands stained and powerless. The mortality rates in these situations were catastrophic. When complications arose, the mother had at best a slim chance of survival. The midwife, therefore, carried a burden far heavier than her kit. In the aftermath of a death, she bore not only the grief of the family, but often their blame and the scrutiny of the community. Roman law could hold her accountable. If a mother of free status died under her care, the midwife could face legal action for negligence, a concept known as culpa. Her reputation, her livelihood, and her very freedom were on the line with every birth she attended. This constant shadow of potential failure meant that every successful delivery was not just a medical triumph, but a personal and professional redemption. It forged a resilience in these women that was as hard as the iron in their birthing knives, a quiet understanding that their sacred work was danced on the very edge of an abyss. The midwife's most critical vigil often began after the birth itself. Her departure from the household was not marked by the baby's first cry, but by the mother's steady recovery. For weeks, sometimes longer, she remained a guiding presence, her focus now split between 2 fragile lives in a delicate new balance. Her first and most urgent priority was the mother's survival in the treacherous postpartum landscape. Childbed fever, what we now understand as a bacterial infection, was a silent and relentless killer. Without any knowledge of germs or antiseptics, the midwife relied on sharp observation. She would monitor the new mother for the dreaded signs: a rising fever, chills, abdominal pain, or a foul-smelling discharge. Her tools against this invisible enemy were limited to what nature and tradition provided. She might administer febrifuge herbs like willow bark, a natural source of salicylic acid, to lower a fever. She used warm compresses and soothing sips of barley water, and she enforced strict rest, understanding intuitively that exhaustion opened the door to illness. Her constant watch was a lonely defense against a threat she could not see, a battle fought with vigilance and hope. Her care extended into every detail of the mother's daily life. She prescribed a specific postpartum diet, moving the mother from the light foods of late pregnancy to restorative broths, easily digestible grains, and protein-rich legumes to rebuild her strength. This was not just about nutrition, it was about rebalancing the body's humors, the Roman medical theory of fluids that governed health. Gentle movement might be encouraged once the mother was stable, but the emphasis was on profound rest, a recognition of the physical trauma the body had endured. The midwife also managed the mother's comfort, preparing sitz baths with healing herbs like mugwort or chamomile to ease pain and promote healing. In all this, she was part nurse, part nutritionist, and part enforcer, ensuring the mother had the space and resources to heal in a household that might quickly expect her to resume domestic duties. Parallel to this was the vital matter of milk. Successful lactation was not a given, and it was seen as essential for the infant's survival and character. The midwife would assist the mother with nursing, advising on positioning and latching, and she might prepare galactagogue herbs like fenugreek or fennel, believed to stimulate milk production. This was a hands-on, intimate coaching, another thread in the continuous bond she forged with the family. But if the mother's milk did not come in, or if she was too ill, or if she was an elite woman who chose not to nurse, the midwife faced a complex social negotiation. She would often be tasked with securing a wet nurse. This was a decision fraught with implication. The wet nurse, or nutrix, was frequently a slave within the household, or one hired from the bustling market for such services. Roman writers like Soranus and the philosopher Favorinus engaged in heated debate over this practice. They argued that breast milk was not mere food, it was a vital fluid that transmitted the nurse's own moral and physical qualities to the child. Would a slave's milk, they worried, imbue a freeborn Roman infant with a servile temperament? Could fear or melancholy in the nurse sour her milk and affect the baby's health? The midwife, therefore, had to evaluate more than a woman's ability to produce milk. She was expected to assess the potential nurse's character, her age, her health, and even her ethnicity, as some believed certain nationalities produced better milk. It was a strange fusion of primitive biology and deep-seated social prejudice, and the midwife stood at its practical center. Her recommendation could determine which slave in the home was given this prestigious, demanding duty, or which stranger was brought in to nourish the family's heir. In managing milk, she was navigating the very essence of what Romans believed shaped a person, from the physical substance of their body to the intangible qualities of their soul. Yet in the quiet after the birth, her most subtle tools were words and charms. For the Roman midwife, a successful delivery required more than physical skill. It demanded the management of invisible forces. In a world where every unexplained fever or sudden infant death was attributed to supernatural malice, her role as a ritual expert was not a side duty, it was central to her practice. The line between a healing herb and a protective chant was not just blurry, it was non-existent. Both were medicines for different layers of the same reality. Her knowledge of these mystical arts granted her a form of authority that no male physician could ever claim, an intimate power over the spiritual dangers that haunted the threshold of life. Her primary foe in this unseen war was the Strix, plural striges. These were not mere storybook monsters. Romans believed in them with a chilling certainty. The striges were vampiric, owl-like witches who flew by night, drawn by the scent of new life. Their goal was to steal into a home and snatch the newborn, or to curse it with wasting sickness. To counter them, the midwife became a master of apotropaic magic, the art of turning away evil. She would craft and prescribe specific amulets. The most famous was the bulla, a small locket, often made of gold for the wealthy or leather for the poor, containing protective substances like dried herbs or a written charm. This was placed around the baby's neck immediately after the naming ceremony and worn throughout childhood. It was a physical shield, a constant guardian against the striges' gaze. But her arsenal extended far beyond jewelry. She might hang garlands of garlic and iron nails over the cradle, as both substances were thought to repel evil. She would recite specific incantations, whispering words of power to create an invisible barrier around the mother's bed. We catch direct echoes of these practices from an astonishing source, the Greek magical papyri. These are fragments of ancient spell books, practical manuals used by ritual practitioners across the Roman world. Among them are spells explicitly for childbirth. One might invoke the terrifying goddess Hecate, mistress of crossroads and magic, not to bring harm but to act as a protective guardian. A midwife might whisper a formula like, "I call upon you, Hecate of the heavens, Hecate of the earth, Hecate of the underworld, come to this woman in labor, bring your light and ease her pain." This was not casual prayer, it was a precise ritual technology, using the true names of deities and commanding words to compel divine assistance. Another spell might involve inscribing protective symbols on a clay tablet to place under the birthing bed. These papyri reveal that midwives, or the wise women they consulted, had access to a sophisticated, cross-cultural tradition of ritual magic. They were expected to know which deity to call upon for a stalled labor, which plant to use not just for its chemical properties, but for its symbolic power to open or bind. This mystical aspect fundamentally shaped how the community saw her. It gave her immense psychological authority. In the terrified mind of a laboring mother, the midwife who calmly recited an ancient charm against demons was actively fighting the most frightening battle of all. This made her a figure of profound reverence, a necessary guardian in a spiritually dangerous world, yet that same knowledge could twist into suspicion. If she knew the spells to protect life, might she not also know the curses to end it? If she could invoke Hecate for good, could she not call upon her for malice? A midwife who had a dispute with a family, or who was simply present when a series of tragic births occurred in a neighborhood, could quickly find herself accused of witchcraft. Her intimate access to the blood of birth, the placenta, and the newborn itself, substances brimming with potent magical potential in Roman belief, only deepened this ambiguity. She was the keeper of powerful, dangerous secrets, so while the community relied on her magic for protection, they also feared the very power they asked her to wield. She walked a narrow path, her bag holding both the bronze speculum and the written spell, her hands skilled in delivering babies and in fashioning charms, forever balanced between the trusted healer and the potential witch. This duality was the price of her power, a reflection of the ancient world's deepest belief that life and death were not just biological events, but a constant negotiation with the unseen. Her knowledge of birth made her a formidable witness in a Roman courtroom. When disputes over inheritance, legitimacy, or citizenship erupted, the midwife's voice carried a unique legal weight. In a society obsessed with lineage and property, the question of who was truly born to whom could shatter families and fortunes. Here, the midwife's professional observation became cold, hard evidence. She could be summoned before a magistrate to testify under oath about the events in that dimly lit birthing room. Her testimony on whether a child was born alive and viable was considered legally binding. She could describe the mother's condition, the time of birth, even identify distinctive birthmarks. In a paternity suit, her account could confirm or destroy a man's claim to a child, deciding the fate of entire estates. This was a profound level of trust placed in her word, elevating her from a medical practitioner to a sworn guardian of social truth. The satirist Juvenal, ever ready to skewer Roman hypocrisy, paints a cynical picture of this very scenario. In one of his poems, he mocks a wealthy man desperate for an heir, suggesting he could easily bribe a midwife to falsely testify that a child born to his wife was truly his, even if it was the product of an affair. Juvenal's satire cuts to a core anxiety. The midwife held power over the most intimate facts of life, and that power could be bought. This reveals the deep ambivalence of her status. She was both a pillar of the legal system and a potential point of corruption within it, yet the same intimate access that gave her authority in court also made her vulnerable to devastating accusations. A midwife moved freely in the private world of women, a space largely closed to men. This alone bred suspicion. If a child was stillborn or a mother died, grief could quickly twist into blame. She could be dragged into court not as a witness but as a defendant charged with culpa or professional negligence. The penalties were severe, ranging from heavy fines to exile, and for a slave or freed woman, even a return to bondage. But the charges could grow far darker. Because she handled potent herbs and knew their uses, she could be accused of beneficium, the practice of harmful magic or poisoning. The line between a medicinal draught to ease labor and a deadly potion was invisible to a suspicious eye. Even more dangerously, her presence in the marital home provided opportunity for accusations of adultery. Roman moralists fretted constantly about the chastity of wives, and the midwife, as a constant female companion with knowledge of secrets, was seen as a potential go-between or corrupting influence. Pliny the Elder, in his vast natural history, reflects this pervasive distrust. While cataloging medicinal plants, he often pauses to warn about their use by midwives and wise women, whom he implies are as likely to use them for illicit abortions or love potions as for healing. He writes of them with a mix of fascination and fear, documenting their recipes while subtly questioning their morals. This tension between respected professional and suspected criminal was the tightrope she walked every day. Her social standing was never fixed. It was a precarious balance earned through a flawless reputation. A midwife known for her successful deliveries and discreet conduct could build a thriving practice, serving elite families and commanding high fees. She could achieve a level of financial independence and social respect rare for a woman of her time, yet that respect was conditional, as fragile as the lives in her care. One bad outcome, one rumor started by a rival, one vengeful accusation from a spurned suitor could topple her completely. The community needed her unique skills to navigate the perilous journey of birth, but they also feared the secret she kept and the power she wielded in the shadows. She was simultaneously the guardian of the family line and a potential threat to its purity, a healer who could be recast as a poisoner with a single tragic turn of events. Her story, therefore, is not just one of medical history, but of a woman navigating a world that granted her authority only to hold that very authority against her. While the vast majority of midwives remain nameless shadows in history, their professional world is suddenly illuminated by the light of a few surviving texts. The most brilliant and comprehensive of these lights comes not from a midwife herself, but from a physician named Soranus of Ephesus. Practicing in Rome during the early 2nd century, Soranus produced a work simply titled Gynecology. It is a staggering document, a detailed manual that reads like a textbook for the ideal midwife. In its pages, the whispered, hands-on knowledge of generations is given structure, debated, and codified. Soranus provides a step-by-step guide for virtually every scenario, from selecting the perfect wet nurse to diagnosing complex uterine ailments. His work is our clearest window into what the Roman medical elite considered competent, even exemplary, practice. But Soranus is more than just a recorder. He is a thinker with surprisingly modern sensibilities. He often argues against the prevailing superstitions of his age. For instance, he openly criticizes the common practice of placing amulets on the mother during labor, seeing them as useless distractions. He dismisses the fear that a sneeze could cause a miscarriage as pure nonsense. Instead, he advocates for a rational, almost scientific approach rooted in observation and practical logic. One of his most progressive recommendations concerns the mother's activity during pregnancy and labor. While many of his contemporaries insisted on near-total rest, Soranus prescribed regular, gentle exercise like walking. He believed it strengthened the mother and made for an easier delivery, a view that aligns remarkably well with modern prenatal advice. His instructions for the birth itself are meticulous. He describes the ideal birthing chair, the proper position for the mother, and the exact hand movements for the midwife to assist the baby's passage. He even details how to tie and cut the umbilical cord, specifying a precise length to leave. Reading Soranus, you get the sense of a mind striving to bring order and reason to the most chaotic of human events. He elevates midwifery from folk tradition to a disciplined craft, yet we must ask, how widely was this elite textbook actually followed? The midwife in a small provincial town, far from the libraries of Rome, likely relied more on the traditional wisdom of her teacher than on Soranus's scrolls. His work represents an ideal, a high watermark of theory that both reflected and sought to reform the messy reality of daily practice. It shows us that within Roman medicine, a battle was already being waged between superstition and empirical reason, and the midwife, guided by texts like these, was often on the front line of that quiet revolution. Soranus, the physician who wrote the textbook, represents a quiet but profound shift in the ancient world. His meticulous instructions for midwives point to a larger, often unspoken tension that simmered beneath the surface of Roman childbirth, a tension between the traditional female space of the delivery room and the emerging world of formal, male-dominated medicine. For centuries, childbirth was the undisputed domain of women, governed by modesty, ritual, and hands-on knowledge passed from mother to daughter, from midwife to apprentice. The very idea of a man, a medicus, entering that sacred space was considered deeply improper, a violation of both social decorum and spiritual safety. Male doctors were, with rare exceptions, called only when everything had gone catastrophically wrong, when the midwife had exhausted all her skills and the situation was dire. They were the last resort, not the first line of defense. This separation created two parallel streams of medical practice. On one side stood the midwife, the obstetrix. Her authority was empirical, born from countless hours at the bedside. She learned by doing, by feeling, by observing the subtle rhythms of labor that no textbook could fully capture. Her knowledge was intimate, holistic, and woven seamlessly with the spiritual protections her patients demanded. On the other side stood the physician, often a Greek like Soranus or the even more famous Galen, who practiced in Rome a generation later. These men were theorists and philosophers of the body. They studied anatomy, debated the balance of the four humors, and wrote lengthy, systematic treatises. Galen, whose influence would dominate Western medicine for over 1,000 years, wrote extensively on women's health, despite having likely never attended a birth himself. His knowledge came from dissection, from logic, and from the works of other male writers. So what happened when these two worlds collided in an emergency? The dynamic was less a direct rivalry and more a fraught consultation. Picture the scene: a labor has stalled for 2 days, the mother is weakening, the midwife's herbs and prayers have failed, and the family is gripped by panic. Only then is a messenger sent sprinting for the medicus. When he arrives, he does not take over. He stands at the threshold, or perhaps just inside the room, maintaining a respectful distance. The midwife becomes his eyes and hands. She describes the symptoms, the duration, the color and flow. She might even perform an internal examination and report her findings to him, translating the intimate, tactile reality of the crisis into the clinical language of theory. He in turn acts as a consultant. Based on her report and his theoretical knowledge, he might prescribe a more powerful drug, suggest a different manual maneuver described in a text, or offer a prognosis. The midwife then carries out the instructions. This created a complex hierarchy. The physician held the social prestige of formal learning. His word carried weight with the anxious paterfamilias. But the midwife held the practical, immediate power. She was the one with the skill to execute any plan, and she was the one who had built the trust of the mother in her most vulnerable hour. This tension between empirical, female knowledge and formalized, male medicine is a recurring theme in history. The Roman midwife operated in a world that was beginning to value the written word and theoretical system over oral tradition and practiced intuition. A text like Soranus's Gynecology can be seen as an attempt to bridge that gap, to bring the midwife's craft into the male intellectual sphere by systematizing it. Yet it also represents a subtle appropriation. By writing it down, by creating the curriculum, the male physician was, in a sense, claiming authority over a domain that had never belonged to him. For the midwife on the ground, this changing landscape presented both opportunity and threat. A midwife who could read, who was familiar with the theories of Soranus or Galen, could enhance her own practice and elevate her status. She could speak the language of the physicians and perhaps secure more elite clients, but it also meant her traditional, experience-based authority was now being measured against an external, theoretical standard created by men who were not in the room. This quiet intrusion marked the beginning of a long, slow process that would, over centuries, fundamentally reshape who was seen as the legitimate expert on women's bodies. Yet in the Roman world, that process was just beginning. The midwife, for all the theoretical challenges, remained the sovereign of the birthing stool, the general who won or lost the battle in the field, while the physician remained the distant strategist, called upon only when the lines were about to break. Her world was one of action, not just theory, and that action extended far beyond the delivery room, into the very fabric of the community's health. The silent testimony of history is often found not in scrolls, but in stone and metal. To truly know the Roman midwife, we must step away from the texts of physicians and satirists and into the archaeological record, where her world is preserved in poignant, tangible detail. Our journey begins in the ancient port city of Ostia with a single remarkable tombstone. It marks the grave of a woman named Scribonia Attis, and her epitaph speaks volumes. It tells us she was a medica, a doctor, and more specifically an obstetrix, a midwife, but it does not stop with her title. The inscription proudly declares that she was omnibus carissima, dearly beloved by all, and that she practiced her art sign querela without complaint or fault. This is no simple marker. It is a public monument to professional excellence and deep personal respect. Scribonia Attis was clearly a woman of means, able to commission such a stone, and her community felt her loss keenly enough to celebrate her skill for eternity. Her grave alone shatters the stereotype of the midwife as a shadowy, low-status figure. She was a recognized and cherished professional. Further south, in the ash-preserved ruins of Pompeii, we find the tools of her trade. In the house of the surgeon, archaeologists discovered a set of bronze surgical instruments, including that iconic, complex speculum. Its finely crafted screws and blades are a testament to sophisticated metalworking, but also to a clinical mindset. This was not a tool for superstition, it was a tool for seeing, for diagnosis. Its presence in a wealthy home suggests it was part of a midwife's or a physician's kit, a valuable object used in service of life. Similar instruments have been found across the empire, from military hospitals to civilian settlements, telling us that this knowledge of the body and these techniques for intervention were widespread. These are not the crude implements of a butcher, but the precise apparatus of a craftsperson confronting physical reality head-on. Perhaps the most emotionally resonant artifacts, however, are the humble votive offerings left at healing sanctuaries. At sites sacred to deities like Juno Lucina or the Greek healing god Asclepius, ordinary people would leave small terracotta or marble offerings, often depicting the part of the body they wish to be healed. Among these are numerous models of utery, and even more striking, small plaques showing a woman in the act of childbirth, sometimes attended by another figure. These were left by mothers in gratitude for a safe delivery or in desperate hope for one. They are a direct line to the personal faith and fear of Roman women. But they also silently honor the midwife. In many of these depictions, the attending figure is shown actively assisting, her hands positioned on the mother's abdomen or ready to receive the child. She is rendered as an essential part of the sacred moment. These votives were not commissioned by the midwives themselves, they were given by the families they served. They represent the most authentic form of social recognition possible, a thankful acknowledgement carved in clay and offered to the gods. Together, this evidence forms a powerful triad. The tombstone gives us her name and social standing, the tools reveal her technical capability and the empirical nature of her work. The votives show us her role through the eyes of those who depended on her, embedded in ritual and gratitude. Archaeology confirms what the texts only imply, that the Roman midwife was a fixture of daily life, a skilled practitioner who moved through a world that saw her craft as both a necessary science and a sacred trust. Her legacy is written in more than words. It is forged in bronze and baked into clay, a permanent record of the hands that guided life into the light. The sun has not yet crested the rooftops when Lydia lights a small lamp before her household shrine. Her morning prayer to Juno Lucina is not a formality, it is a whispered plea for clear sight and steady hands. As a freedwoman, her time is her own, but her day is dictated by the unpredictable rhythms of the city's womb. She packs her leather satchel with methodical care, the bronze speculum wrapped in soft linen, vials of lavender and poppy oil stoppered with wax, clean strips of cloth, and a small, worn amulet of Diana. Each item is a promise, a tool for a different kind of battle. Her first call takes her up the slope of the Palatine Hill to the home of a senator's wife. The air here is different, scented with lemon trees and quiet wealth. She is admitted not through the main entrance, but through a side door leading directly to the women's quarters, the gynaeceum. This is her domain. The lady of the house is in her 7th month, and Lydia's visit is one of routine supervision. She asks careful questions about sleep and appetite, feels the mother's abdomen to assess the baby's position, and recommends a longer walk in the garden for strength. She leaves a small pouch of dried chamomile for tea to soothe nerves. The conversation is calm, professional, a transaction of trust and expertise. The fee she receives, discreetly pressed into her hand by a household slave, is generous. This is the clean, respectable face of her work. Her second summons comes as she descends back into the city's heart, a breathless slave boy finding her near the forum. His mistress, a baker's wife in the suburra, has begun her pains early. The world shifts instantly. Lydia follows him into a maze of narrow, pungent streets, climbing dark wooden stairs to a cramped apartment in a towering insula. The room is hot, close, crowded with anxious female relatives. Here, there is no perfumed garden, only the smell of baking bread from below and human sweat. The mother is young, terrified. Lydia clears the room with a firm authority only her presence can command, leaving just one sister to assist. She assesses the situation quickly. The baby is coming, feet first. This is the emergency she trains for. Her voice drops to a low, steady murmur as she washes her hands and arms in wine. She talks the mother through each wave of pain, her hands gently working to turn the child, a maneuver of immense patience and pressure. Time stretches and collapses in the sweltering room. When the baby, a boy, finally emerges with a healthy cry, the relief is palpable, a physical force. Her payment here is not coin, but a loaf of still warm bread and a jar of honey, gifts of profound gratitude from a family with little to spare. She stays long enough to ensure the afterbirth is delivered and the baby is nursing, then offers a final prayer over the sleeping mother. As twilight paints the sky, Lydia does not go home. Her feet carry her across the Tiber to a grove sacred to Diana on the Aventine Hill. This is not for a client, but for herself. The dim temple is cool, the statue of the goddess stern and watchful. Lydia places a simple offering of grain and a few small coins on the altar. She does not speak her prayers aloud, but they are there in the stillness. She gives thanks for the life saved in the suburra and asks for strength for the unseen struggles of the coming days. In this quiet space, the three threads of her existence, the skilled professional, the emergency responder, and the spiritual intermediary, are woven back into a single, weary whole. She walks home in the gathering dark, her satchel lighter, her spirit weighed down by the day's toll and lifted by its small victories. Another day in the silent, essential service of Rome's first and most dangerous breath. Lydia's world was Rome, but the empire stretched from rainy northern forests to sun-baked desert oases. The Roman midwife, as defined by Soranus and the tools found in Pompeii, represents an ideal, a standard of practice promoted from the center of power. Yet the reality on the ground, from province to province, was a vibrant tapestry of local adaptation. The job of the midwife was not monolithic. It was a conversation between imperial instruction and ancient, rooted tradition. To see this, we can journey to two extremes of the empire, beginning in the fertile, ancient land of Egypt. Here Rome ruled, but it did not erase. The midwives of Roman Egypt operated at a fascinating crossroads. They would have been familiar with the Greco-Roman medical theories, perhaps even snippets of Soranus's work, but their daily practice was steeped in a far older Egyptian wisdom. Papyri recovered from the sands reveal this blend with stunning clarity. One document might contain a precise recipe for a medicinal pessary made from acacia gum, a known antiseptic, written in Greek. On the very same scroll, just lines later, you might find a spell to be recited during a difficult labor, invoking both the Greek goddess Artemis and the Egyptian protector Tauret, the hippopotamus goddess of childbirth. This was not confusion, it was pragmatic syncretism. A midwife in Alexandria or Thebes had the entire history of Mediterranean medicine at her fingertips, and she used it all. Her toolkit might include a bronze speculum from a Roman workshop alongside an amulet of Bes, the dwarf god who scared away demons, just as her Roman counterpart used iron. She would prescribe barley water for a fever, an Egyptian staple, while also recommending the Roman practice of swaddling. Her authority came from mastering this hybrid knowledge, offering her patients the combined power of two legendary healing traditions. It was a practical, confident fusion where the goal of a safe birth justified using every available resource, whether its origin was a Roman textbook or an incantation from the time of the pharaohs. Now picture the stark contrast of the northern frontier in a place like Britannia. Here, a midwife serving a Roman garrison town or a partially Romanized local chieftain faced a different kind of blending. The official Roman presence brought with it the ideal of the trained obstetrix and her instruments, but outside the stone walls of the fort or the villa, the land was governed by different spirits. Celtic herbal lore was profound and specific. A local midwife would know which mosses from the oak forest could staunch bleeding, which berries could ease pain, and which sacred springs were dedicated to mother goddesses like Sulis, later merged with the Roman Minerva. Her practice would likely be a quiet negotiation. She might adopt the Roman birthing stool for its practical design, but the herbs she used to anoint it would be local. She might pay homage to the Roman Juno Lucina in the household shrine, but when walking to a remote homestead, she would also leave a small offering at a forest stream for the local genius loci, the spirit of the place. There were no papyri here, no libraries. Knowledge was carried in memory and in the hands. If a Roman military doctor was present, his interaction with such a local practitioner would be even more distant and fraught with mutual suspicion than in Rome itself. Yet through this slow daily exchange, a new hybrid practice would emerge. The Roman emphasis on structured observation might temper purely ritual responses, while the deep, place-specific botanical knowledge of the Celts would enrich the midwife's pharmacopoeia. This was adaptation for survival, taking the useful core of imperial practice and wrapping it in the familiar, trusted wisdom of the land. This regional diversity tells us something crucial about the Roman world itself. The empire could build roads, impose laws, and spread Latin, but it could not standardize birth. That process was too intimate, too deeply tied to local ecology, spirituality, and community. The Roman midwife as an idea was a powerful export, but the woman actually doing the work was always a local expert first. She was a translator, mediating between the body of imperial medicine and the soul of her own culture. In Egypt, she blended scrolls and spells. In Britannia, she combined stools and sacred springs. In Rome itself, she balanced Soranus with the cult of Diana. This adaptability was her real strength, not a sign of inconsistency, but of intelligent, pragmatic resilience. It meant that from the deserts to the highlands, women in labor were attended by someone who understood not just the universal mechanics of birth, but the particular world into which that new life would cry. The empire provided a framework, but it was the midwife, rooted in her own place, who filled it with the specific, life-saving details that truly mattered. But that intimate knowledge of life's beginnings also gave her power over its prevention. Within the midwife's repertoire existed a shadowy catalog of herbs and methods for controlling fertility, a secretive art that placed her at the heart of one of Rome's most profound social and legal conflicts. For women across the empire, whether seeking to space out children, conceal an illicit pregnancy, or avoid the mortal danger of another birth, the midwife was the sole repository of this dangerous, essential wisdom. Her pharmacopoeia contained plants with potent and sometimes lethal reputations. Silphium, a fennel-like plant harvested in North Africa, was so famously associated with preventing or ending pregnancy that it was depicted on coins and driven to extinction, likely from over-harvesting. Pennyroyal, a common mint, was brewed into teas as an abortifacient, though the line between an effective dose and a fatal one was terrifyingly thin. Other methods were more mechanical. Recipes from medical texts like those of Soranus describe spermicidal pessaries made from ingredients like acacia gum, which creates a lactic acid barrier, or even crocodile dung, believed to act as a physical plug. Barrier methods such as wool tampons soaked in olive oil or honey were also documented. This was not fringe magic, it was applied experimental biology, passed in whispers from one practitioner to the next. The midwife knew which herbs could bring on a late menstrual period and which could trigger violent, catastrophic cramping. She understood the rhythms of the body well enough to advise on the timing of intercourse to avoid conception. This knowledge made her indispensable, but it also painted a target on her back. Roman law, particularly the Lex Cornelia de Sicariis et Veneficis enacted under the dictator Sulla, criminalized the administering of poisons, a category that was often interpreted to include abortifacient drugs. The legal reality, however, was murky and deeply unequal. Abortion was not illegal in a modern sense, but the right to procure one was not the woman's. The offense was against the paterfamilias, the male head of the household, who held legal ownership over his wife's womb as the source of his heirs. If a wife terminated a pregnancy without her husband's consent, she was seen as stealing his property, his future son. The midwife who assisted her was an accomplice to that theft and could be prosecuted under the Cornelian law as a poisoner. The penalties were severe, ranging from exile to execution. For an enslaved woman seeking an abortion, the consequences could be even more brutal, left entirely to the discretion of her owner. This legal framework meant the midwife operated in a perilous gray zone. Her services might be quietly sought by a desperate wife in a violent marriage or by a young unmarried woman facing ruin. Each consultation was a risk assessment, not just of the medicine's safety, but of potential exposure. A disgruntled client, a suspicious husband, or a rival practitioner could accuse her of beneficium, of using her herbs for malice instead of healing. This dual identity, trusted healer and potential criminal, fundamentally shaped her shadowy reputation. To the community, she was the woman who knew how to bring life into the world, but also, in strictest confidence, how to stop it. This granted her a fearsome kind of autonomy, a power that existed outside the control of men and the state, conducted in the silent, secret spaces where women gathered. It was perhaps the most intimate and dangerous trust she held, binding her clients to her with chains of silence and forever balancing her on the knife's edge between societal pillar and prosecuted outlaw. The grove sacred to Diana grew quieter as the centuries turned. A new spiritual current was flowing through the empire, one that would slowly but profoundly reshape the midwife's ancient role. With the rise of Christianity, the very framework of meaning around childbirth began to transform. The old gods, Juno Lucina and Diana, were now denounced as demons by the growing faith. For the midwife, this was not a simple change of decoration. It was a fundamental shift in the cosmology of her work. The rituals that had surrounded birth for 1,000 years, the prayers whispered to pagan deities, the amulets carved with their images, were now suspect potentially heretical. Her spiritual toolkit, once a source of comfort and authority, required careful translation into a new divine language. Church fathers like Augustine and Jerome wrote extensively on matters of family and reproduction, and their views cast a long shadow. They reinterpreted the pain of childbirth through the lens of Genesis, framing it explicitly as part of Eve's curse, a perpetual reminder of original sin. This theological stance could subtly color the experience of labor, potentially casting it not just as a physical trial, but as a spiritual burden to be endured with pious resignation. Furthermore, Christian teachings placed a new, intense emphasis on female modesty and chastity. This created a heightened tension around the midwife's necessary physical intimacy with her patients. While her access was still required, it now occurred under the watchful eye of a religion deeply concerned with the purity of the body. The midwife had to navigate these new sensitivities, ensuring her care was seen as morally upright within the emerging Christian household. The most immediate and practical change, however, was in the realm of ritual. The midwife's critical function as a spiritual guardian did not disappear, it was baptized. Her prayers now invoked the Christian God, the Virgin Mary, and the saints. The protective amulet might be replaced with a cross or a medallion bearing the image of a saint. But one new ritual placed an immense, urgent responsibility directly into her hands: emergency baptism. Early Christian doctrine held that an unbaptized infant who died could not enter heaven. This belief turned a tragic but natural event into a potential eternal catastrophe for the family's soul. If a newborn was too weak to survive, or if a mother died in labor leaving a child who might soon follow, the midwife became the only possible conduit for salvation. She was now expected to know the simple but sacred formula. Using whatever water was available, she would pour it over the infant's head while speaking the words, "I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." This act, performed in a room thick with grief, granted her a terrifying new power, the power to grant or deny eternal life according to the timing of her hands. Canon law and pastoral manuals began to include explicit instructions for midwives on this very point, cementing her role within the Church's own emergency sacramental system. In this way, her spiritual authority was not erased but repurposed. She remained the essential bridge between the physical danger of birth and the spiritual needs of the community, but now she answered to a different celestial hierarchy. This integration into Christian practice was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it could legitimize her work, tying her directly to the salvation of souls. A good Christian midwife was a valuable asset to her parish. On the other hand, it opened her up to a new kind of scrutiny from the male clergy. Priests and bishops began to take a more active interest in regulating the morals and orthodoxy of the women who performed baptisms and heard confessions in the birthing room. Was she using approved prayers or slipping back into old pagan charms? Was her own life sufficiently pious to be handling such a holy sacrament? The Church's growing institutional power meant that her traditional, experience-based authority was now being measured against a formal religious doctrine administered by men. The midwife found herself navigating a narrow path, preserving the practical, intimate core of her craft while carefully aligning its spiritual expressions with the new faith that was steadily rewriting the rules of both heaven and earth. That sacred knowledge of the Roman midwife did not simply fade with the empire's fall. Instead, it traveled, preserved on fragile parchment through the long twilight of the medieval world. The meticulous texts of physicians like Soranus found unlikely guardians in the great libraries and translation houses of the Islamic Golden Age. Scholars in Baghdad and Cordoba carefully translated these Greek and Roman medical works into Arabic, adding their own observations and refinements. Centuries later, these same texts, now carrying layers of Islamic scholarship, were translated again into Latin, flowing back into a Europe slowly reawakening to its own classical past. This meant that a midwife in a 13th century Italian city-state or a barber surgeon in a 15th century French town might be consulting knowledge that had originated in a Roman clinic over 1,000 years earlier. The legacy was not in a direct, unbroken line of practice, but in a resilient thread of written wisdom that survived conquests and dark ages to inform new generations. We can see this continuity in the most tangible tools of the craft. The Roman birthing chair, with its open seat and supportive back, never truly disappeared. Its design echoes through medieval woodcuts and Renaissance paintings, a familiar piece of furniture in households across Europe. The principle remained unchanged, gravity and positioning, aided by a dedicated piece of equipment. Similarly, the herbal pharmacopoeia of the Roman midwife became the foundation of the medieval wise woman's garden. Pennyroyal for regulating cycles, ergot for stimulating contractions, chamomile for calming nerves. These plants and their uses were recorded in monastic herbals and passed down orally, their applications refined through relentless trial and error. The midwife's role itself persisted as the unchallenged norm. For well over a millennium after Rome's fall, childbirth remained firmly in the domain of women, attended by women, in the secluded space of the chamber. She was still the obstetrix, the sage femme, the hebum, the primary and often sole authority in the room. This enduring female sovereignty over birth makes the rupture that came next so profound. The shift did not begin with a medical breakthrough, but with a technological one, the invention and adoption of the obstetrical forceps in the 17th century. This instrument, a metal device designed to grasp a baby's head and facilitate delivery in obstructed labor, was initially a closely guarded secret developed by the Chamberlain family in England. Its power was undeniable. It could save lives in situations where a midwife's hands were powerless, but it was an instrument wielded almost exclusively by men, as women were systematically barred from the emerging institutions of formal surgical training. The forceps became the wedge that pried open the door of the birthing chamber. The man midwife or a couture began to appear, first for desperate, complicated cases among the aristocracy, then slowly for normal deliveries among the wealthy who could afford this new, fashionable science. This was not merely a change of personnel, it was a fundamental reframing of childbirth itself. What had been a natural, if dangerous, process managed by female experience was increasingly portrayed as a pathological event requiring male intervention and mechanical aid. The midwife's empirical knowledge was dismissed as old wives' tales, while the man midwife's theoretical training, often derived from the very classical texts her predecessors had preserved, was celebrated as enlightened progress. The intimate spiritual space of the birth room was gradually medicalized, its rituals replaced by clinical procedures. The Roman midwife's world, which had survived the fall of an empire and the rise of a new religion, finally met a force that would permanently alter its landscape: the rising authority of institutional, male-dominated medicine. Her legacy lived on, but now as a foundation being built over, its contours still visible beneath the new structures of control. The image of the Roman midwife has been buried under centuries of cinematic fiction. Hollywood often presents her as a superstitious hag, muttering charms in a corner while the real drama unfolds elsewhere. It is time to clear away that rubble and see the professional who actually stood in the room. First, the stereotype of the ignorant old crone. While age brought experience and some practitioners were certainly elderly, the evidence points to a diverse group. Our friend Scribonia Addis, the midwife honored with that beautiful tombstone, was a respected professional, not a marginal figure. Training was rigorous, passed from master to apprentice, and for those who could access it, informed by texts like that of Soranus, which demanded literacy and reason. She was not a bumbling bystander, she was a trained specialist making critical assessments under immense pressure. Next, the idea that her work was pure magic. This is a fundamental misunderstanding of the ancient worldview. For the Romans, the physical and spiritual were inseparable layers of the same reality. Using a bronze speculum to examine a mother and placing an iron amulet by her bed were not contradictory acts, they were complementary strategies for the same battle. One addressed the body, the other addressed the invisible threats to that body. Her prayers and rituals were a form of applied psychology and community care, providing a framework of control in a terrifyingly uncontrollable situation. To dismiss it as mere superstition is to miss half of her job. Finally, the most persistent myth, that male doctors were routinely present for births. Nothing could be further from historical truth. Childbirth was a strictly female space, a matter of modesty, tradition, and spiritual safety. The male medicus was the emergency consultant, the last resort called only when things had gone horribly wrong, and even then he often directed from the doorway. The sovereign of the birthing room was always the midwife. Think of the dramatic movie scenes where a wise, bearded physician calmly delivers a baby in a well-lit room. That scene is a complete invention. The real scene was dim, crowded with women, and charged with a tense, sacred energy, commanded by a woman whose authority was absolute within those walls. Her medical understanding, while limited by our standards, was sophisticated for its time, blending empirical observation, herbal pharmacology, and mechanical aids like the birthing stool. She was not a character from a fantasy, but a pragmatic professional operating at the sharp edge of life and death, her reality far more compelling than any fiction carved from her silhouette. The historical silence is profound, but it is not absolute. We have spent this journey viewing the Roman midwife through the eyes of others, through the clinical prose of Soranus, the mocking verses of Juvenal, the anxious laws of the state. These are all external portraits framed by male perspectives and societal agendas. To truly know her, we must strain to hear a voice from the shadows, her own. The task is daunting, for women's lives, especially those of working professionals, were rarely deemed worthy of extensive literary record by the elite men who controlled writing. Yet if we know where to look, fragments of her self-portrait emerge, etched in stone, implied in practice, and held in the wear of her own hands. The most direct statements come from the cemetery, not the library. Return to that tombstone of Scribonia Addis, the midwife from Ostia. Her epitaph does not simply state her name, it proclaims her profession, obstetrics, and then it adds a personal boast, sine querela, without complaint, without fault. This is not a description written by a grateful client or a distant relative. This is the voice of professional pride, chosen likely by Scribonia herself or by those who knew her best. It is a public declaration that she practiced her art flawlessly, a claim to excellence meant to endure for eternity. Other epitaphs echo this pride. A woman named Valeria Eunice is remembered as a medica, a female doctor. Another seconded is honored as obstetrix optima, the best midwife. These are not the words of invisible crones. They are the dignified legacies of skilled practitioners who commanded enough respect and resources to purchase a permanent memorial. They tell us that at least some midwives saw themselves and were seen as accomplished professionals worthy of remembrance. We can also listen for her voice in the implied expertise of everyday objects. Consider the recipe. Ancient medical and culinary texts are filled with formulas, often beginning with the phrase, "as midwives know." A recipe for a soothing pessary or a milk-stimulating tea carries the unspoken assumption that the midwife is the expert who will compound it, who understands the proportions and the timing. Her knowledge is the silent prerequisite for the instruction. This is her voice speaking through practical necessity, her mastery embedded in the assumption of her skill. Then there are the tools themselves, which speak a language of action. The bronze speculum from Pompeii, with its precise screw mechanism, does not whisper superstition. It declares a desire to see, to diagnose, to intervene based on evidence. The smooth, worn handle of a birthing stool, polished by generations of palms, speaks of repeated, confident use. A set of carefully sorted surgical probes and spatulas found in a midwife's grave tells a story of organization and purpose. These objects are her unedited testimony. They say, "I was here, I worked with my hands, I used reason and technology alongside faith, I engaged directly with the physical reality of the body." Recovering the Roman midwife's perspective is an act of historical reconstruction, like assembling a mosaic from scattered, colored stones. We have the bright tiles of her tools and her epitaphs, and we must place them carefully within the broader, often murky, picture painted by the male sources. We listen to Soranus for the theory, but we look to the speculum to see the practice. We read Juvenal's satire for the social anxiety, but we read Scribonia's epitaph for the personal dignity. This indirect method is not a failure of history. It is the essential work of listening to the past's quietest voices. The Roman midwife remains a figure we must piece together, precisely because her world existed in the intimate, female space that official history so often overlooked. Her story is not written in scrolls of philosophy, but in the wear patterns on bronze, in the proud lines of an epitaph, and in the silent, grateful offerings left at a healing shrine. To understand her is to understand that the most vital history is sometimes not shouted from the forum, but murmured in the dim light of a birthing room and carried in the hands of the woman who held the threshold of life. That Roman blend of law, ritual, and social pressure was not born in a vacuum. To see its true contours, we need to glance sideways at her most famous contemporaries, the midwives of Greece and Egypt. Each civilization faced the same universal danger of childbirth, but the cultural lens to which they viewed the midwife created strikingly different reflections. In ancient Greece, particularly in the classical era of Athens, the midwife operated within a society obsessed with the ideal of the secluded, modest wife. The Hippocratic medical texts, written by and for male physicians, acknowledge her existence but often frame her as a useful assistant to their theoretical knowledge. She is present, but she is rarely the star of the medical narrative. Her authority was deeply personal and domestic, rooted in the women's quarters, the gynekonitis. While skilled, her role was less about public legal testimony and more about maintaining the purity and privacy of the household. The Greek midwife was a guardian of social boundaries as much as a deliverer of babies, ensuring the sacred, hidden process of birth did not violate the strict codes of female seclusion that defined Athenian civic life. Her power was real, but it was carefully contained within the walls of the home, less visible to the state than her Roman counterpart would become. Now travel to the banks of the Nile. Here, the Egyptian midwife existed in a world where the divine was woven directly into the fabric of daily medicine. For millennia, she was associated intimately with the goddess Hathor, the deity of women, fertility, and childbirth. Scenes from temple walls and tombs often show a midwife in action, sometimes assisted by divine figures. Her practice was a seamless fusion of the practical and the sacred. She used herbal remedies with known efficacy like acacia and honey, which have natural antiseptic properties, but she did so within a framework of incantations and rituals that called upon Hathor's protection. Where the Roman might invoke Juno Lucina with a formal prayer, the Egyptian midwife spirituality was more visceral, tied to a goddess who was also the celestial nurse, depicted as a cow or a woman with cow's ears. This gave her a different kind of cultural stature. She was a channel for a beloved maternal deity, her work sanctified by a religion thousands of years older than Rome itself. Her authority flowed from this ancient divine connection, making her a figure of comfort deeply embedded in a continuous, unbroken tradition. Placing the Roman obstetrics between these two models reveals her unique synthesis. From the Greek world, Rome inherited a focus on the household as a social unit, but it transformed the midwife's place within it. She was not just protecting female modesty, she was safeguarding the legal and economic future of the entire familia. This injected a layer of cold, practical legality into her warm, intimate work. From the Egyptians and through broader Hellenistic influence, Rome absorbed a rich tradition of herbalism and the concept of protective deities. But the Roman genius was to systematize and legalize these elements. The Egyptian midwife served Hathor, the Greek midwife served the household's honor, but the Roman midwife served the empire's demographic engine. Her prayers were formalized, her tools were standardized, and her testimony could be subpoenaed in a court of law. She became a node where domestic ritual met imperial policy. The pressure on her was therefore multiplied. She had to be as spiritually reassuring as an Egyptian priestess of Hathor, as discreet and skilled as a Greek attendant in the gynaeconitis, and as legally astute as a Roman court clerk. This triple burden of healer, priestess, and state witness is what truly defines her. It was this Roman blend that demanded she be both the whisper of charms in a darkened room and the woman who could stand before a magistrate and speak with unshakable authority about the facts of life and death. Her uniqueness lies not in anyone's skill, but in the impossible, vital balance she was required to maintain. Her legacy is not locked in the past, but pulses quietly in every modern delivery room and prenatal clinic. The challenges she faced, the balance she tried to strike, are the very same tensions that define childbirth today. We are still navigating the complex relationship between the midwife and the obstetrician, a direct echo of that ancient divide between the hands-on female practitioner and the theoretically trained male physician. The modern debate over natural birth versus medicalized intervention, over who holds authority in the birthing space, is a continuation of a conversation that began when a Roman medicus first offered advice from the doorway. The professionalization of midwifery, with its rigorous certifications and evidence-based training, fulfills the ideal Soranus outlined, transforming traditional wisdom into a respected, standardized science. Yet the core of the midwife's role, providing continuous, personalized, and holistic support, remains a powerful counterpoint to the often fragmented, procedure-focused model of hospital obstetrics. This is not a new conflict, but an ancient one wearing modern scrubs. Her struggle also mirrors the ongoing fight for women's bodily autonomy. Just as the Roman midwife navigated the legal power of the paterfamilias, women today must often advocate for their own choices within medical systems that can feel impersonal and authoritarian. The question of who decides the course of a birth, who has the right to refuse or request certain interventions, is a modern legal and ethical battleground with ancient roots. The Roman woman's experience was framed by her duty to produce heirs for the state, her body a vessel for civic purpose. While the language has changed, social pressures on mothers remain immense, from the ideal of the natural birth to the scrutiny of parenting choices, creating a different kind of script that women are expected to follow. Understanding the Roman context reminds us that the pressure on mothers to perform their role correctly for society is a story as old as civilization itself. Perhaps the most profound echo is in the renewed hunger for integrated care. The Roman midwife did not see a contradiction between using a bronze speculum and reciting a prayer to Diana. Her approach was inherently holistic, addressing pain with poppy oil, fear with ritual, and physical recovery with dietary advice. Today, we are witnessing a powerful resurgence of this integrated model. The growing popularity of doulas, who provide emotional and physical support, directly recalls the midwife's role as a continuous, reassuring presence. The incorporation of mindfulness, birthing pools, and personalized birth plans into hospital settings represents a modern attempt to reclaim the spiritual and psychological dimensions of birth that pure medicalization often sidelines. It is an effort to weave the thread of human-centered, holistic care back into the fabric of high-tech medicine to treat the person, not just the patient. So when we look at the Roman midwife, we are not just studying an archaeological curiosity. We are holding up a mirror to our own dilemmas about technology and tradition, authority and empathy, the medical and the human. Her story shows us that the central questions of childbirth, who controls it, how it is supported, and what it means for the woman at its center, are timeless. By recognizing her sophisticated blend of skill and spirit, we gain a deeper appreciation for the long, unbroken lineage of women caring for women, and we see more clearly the ancient roots of our very modern search for a birth that is both safe and sacred. The unbroken thread of her story winds from those dim Roman chambers to the very heart of modern maternity. We have traced the Roman midwife through her world, and what emerges is not a simple figure, but a professional of astonishing complexity. She was a medical practitioner, her hands skilled with speculum and herb. She was a ritual specialist, weaving prayers and amulets into a shield against the unseen. She served as a legal witness, her word deciding lineage in a courtroom, and she was the ultimate guardian of family secrets, from the blood of birth to the desperate choices whispered in confidence. Her entire existence was a fusion of skill, faith, and unyielding social duty, performed under the immense shadow of mortality that touched every family. To reduce her to a stereotype is to miss the profound reality of her work. By uncovering her true story, we do more than correct a historical record. We honor these forgotten professionals who stood at the most critical threshold of life. We gain a deeper, more human understanding of what it meant to live, to hope, and to fear in the ancient world. It reminds us that behind the grand narratives of emperors and legions, the real pulse of Rome beat in quiet rooms where women, guided by other women, fought the oldest battle of all. So we leave you with a question born from this journey. What aspect of her multifaceted job surprised you the most? Was it her legal authority, her sophisticated tools, or the heartbreaking weight of her social duties? Share your thoughts below and join us as we continue to uncover the hidden lives that shaped our world.